The Korean Mafia boss was already marked for death. The only reason he was still alive was because a black waitress whispered, "Don't move." The knife wasn't raised. It was resting on his chest. That's how Choi Min-yi knew this wasn't a threat. It was permission to kill him. No one screamed. No one moved. Flat steel rested against the center of his bare chest, pressed just firmly enough to promise consequences. Not a stab, not a threat shouted across a room. The restaurant continued breathing around him. Glassware chimed softly. A couple laughed 2 tables away. A waiter passed behind his chair without pausing. No one reacted. That was wrong. Min-yi's eyes shifted a fraction. Across the table, one of his executives avoided looking at him. 2 seats down, his head of security stared into a candle flame like it held answers. Then a voice touched his ear. "Don't move if you want to live," the black waitress whispered. Calm, measured, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her breath. His body obeyed before pride could argue. Her hand came into his peripheral vision, steady, precise, holding the knife's handle as if stillness itself were a skill she'd mastered. The pressure didn't increase. It didn't need to. "This isn't an attack," she murmured. "It's an interruption." Min-yi swallowed once. "Stay exactly like this," she said softly. "They're waiting for you to flinch." And in that moment, the most powerful Korean mafia boss in the room understood something terrifying. The safest place he could be was completely still. You have been around long enough to know that when a room goes this quiet, trouble is coming. The young ones might miss the signs, but you didn't. You saw the trap before the boss even realized it was there. If you appreciate a story that respects your intelligence and doesn't need to shout to get your attention, please click like and subscribe right now. Show the world that experience always sees what youth misses. Nyla didn't look at the knife again. She didn't need to. Her attention moved outward, quiet and deliberate, sliding across the room the way water finds cracks. She had learned long ago that danger rarely announced itself. It rearranged things, small things, angles, timing. Security was wrong. Not absent, not sloppy, too perfect. The men positioned around Choi Min-yi weren't scanning the room the way bodyguards usually did. They weren't restless. They weren't reading faces. They were still, hands folded, feet planted, eyes fixed just far enough away to claim innocence later. Disciplined. Instructed. Nyla felt it settle into place. Staff routes were wrong too. Servers weren't moving freely between tables. They were looping, passing behind Min-yi's chair at precise intervals, never stopping long enough to draw attention, never clustering where a witness might form a memory. Even the wine service had been slowed, glasses filled halfway, just enough to keep hands busy. Control without noise. Min-yi breathed exactly the way she'd told him to. Slow, shallow, alive. Nyla adjusted her stance by half an inch, not toward him, not away, but sideways. A position that looked like service, like nothing. From this angle, she could see reflections in polished cutlery, the faint mirror of a phone screen 2 tables away, angled just enough to record without pointing. Someone wanted a story afterward. She caught a waiter's eyes as he passed. Not fear, not surprise, relief, as if he was grateful she'd arrived on time. That was when she knew. This wasn't a random assassination. This was choreography. A Korean mafia boss didn't get killed like this by accident. Not in public, not without permission written into the room. Nyla let her voice drop lower, barely sound at all. "They've practiced this," she murmured. "Your people included." Min-yi didn't respond. He couldn't. That was the rule. Any movement now, any break in the image would give someone an excuse to act. A hand on a gun, a shouted warning. A clean shot justified by panic. Nyla watched for impatience. That's where killers always failed. One executive checked his watch too early. A fraction too soon. Another shifted his chair, just enough to clear space behind him, preparing for what came next. Not the kill. The reaction. Nyla understood, then what role she was meant to play. Not the savior. The scapegoat. The black waitress with a knife. The perfect interruption to blame. Her grip didn't tighten, it steadied. She leaned closer, close enough that Min-yi could hear certainty in her breath. "Stay exactly like this," she whispered. "If you live through this, it won't be because of your power." Her eyes lifted, calm, observant, already hunting the man who thought silence would hide him. "It'll be because I saw what they wanted you not to see." And in a room pretending nothing was wrong, Nyla Washington began to take control of the story, one quiet detail at a time. Nyla felt the truth settle the moment Minyi's pulse steadied beneath the blade. The knife wasn't meant to cut him. If it were, she would already be wet with blood, the table overturned, the restaurant screaming. That kind of kill was loud, messy, hard to explain. This one was clean. The flat side of the blade rested exactly where it needed to, close enough to promise pain, gentle enough to wait. A asterisk control blade asterisk. The kind used when the real weapon wasn't steel, but reaction. Nyla had seen it before. The trick wasn't to stab the target. The trick was to make him move. A flinch, a breath taken too fast, a chair scraping back half an inch. That was all it took. The moment the Korean Mafia boss broke stillness, someone else could step in, gun raised, voice loud, righteousness rehearsed. Self-defense. A protector doing his duty. The room would accept it, because panic always looked honest after the fact. Nyla leaned in, her mouth close to Minyi's ear, her voice low enough to disappear into the hum of conversation. "The knife isn't the kill," she whispered. "It's the excuse." Minyi understood immediately. He had built empires on excuses. Across the room, one of his guards shifted his weight, then froze again, as if remembering a rule he'd been told not to break yet. Another kept his hand near his jacket, not reaching inside, just close enough to make the gesture believable later. They were waiting. Waiting for the Korean Mafia boss to remind them he was human. Nyla watched Minyi's chest rise, slow and controlled. Good. Panic would betray him faster than fear ever could. Panic made men forget patterns. Fear sharpened them. "Stillness is survival," she murmured. "They can't act unless you give them permission." She adjusted the blade a fraction, not tighter, not looser, just enough to make the pressure unmistakable. A reminder without escalation. Minyi's jaw tightened, his eyes fixed on the table. He didn't blink. That alone saved his life. Nyla tracked the room in reflections and shadows. The polished edge of a wine tray, the dark glass of a window, the faint shimmer of a phone screen tilted at the wrong angle, already capturing what someone hoped would become evidence. A story was being prepared. Black waitress attacks Korean Mafia boss. Security intervenes. Tragedy avoided too late. Neat, believable, disposable. Nyla felt a cold calm take over, the kind that arrived only when the danger was finally clear. This wasn't about hatred. It wasn't personal. It was procedure. She exhaled slowly, close enough that Minyi felt it. "They don't want you dead in anger," she said. "They want you dead correctly." The restaurant laughed again, somewhere behind them. Nyla didn't smile. She held the blade steady and let the room wait for a mistake that wasn't coming. Nyla had learned to recognize the moment before memory hurt. It arrived quietly, the way this room had, soft lighting, warm colors, laughter drifting just far enough away to feel unreal. The blade against Choi Minyi's chest didn't scare her. The sound of a fork scraping porcelain did. Because she had heard it before. Years ago, another restaurant, different city, same kind of calm. The lights had been dim then too, flattering faces, hiding intent. She remembered the way the air smelled of wine and butter, the way conversation continued even when it shouldn't have. She remembered standing still, holding her breath, thinking the danger would announce itself if it were real. It never did. The pressure had been flat that night too. Not a cut, not a slash, just enough steel to force hesitation. She remembered the laughter, too normal, too unbroken, right up until the moment someone moved the wrong way. The sound that followed hadn't been loud, just final. That was the day she learned how people really died. Not screaming. Not fighting. But misreading stillness. Nyla never forgot the pattern. So when she felt Minyi's heartbeat steady under the knife, when she watched the room perform normalcy like a rehearsed act, something inside her locked into place. This wasn't chaos. This was method, and methods repeated themselves. Her calm wasn't bravery. It was recognition. She adjusted her grip with care, keeping the flat of the blade exactly where it belonged. A fraction higher and it would provoke fear. A fraction lower and it would invite movement. Precision mattered. Survival depended on it. Minyi sensed the shift, not in pressure but in certainty. The black waitress behind him wasn't guessing anymore. She knew. "Don't change your breathing," she whispered. "They're listening for it." He obeyed. Trusting the stillness, she commanded more than the instincts that had kept him alive for decades. Nyla's eyes flicked across the room again, sharper now. She noticed the way one guard's jaw tightened when Minyi didn't flinch. The way another glanced toward the exit too soon. They were following a script that required a mistake. And she was refusing to give them one. This wasn't luck. It wasn't timing. It wasn't courage found in the moment. It was a scar reopening quietly beneath her calm. Someone had been taken from her by this same silent assassination, by the same polite patience, the same expectation that fear would do the killing for them. She hadn't stopped it then. She wasn't going to miss it again. Nyla leaned closer, her voice steady, her resolve settled. "I've seen this before," she murmured. "They're waiting for panic." The Korean Mafia boss stayed perfectly still. And for the first time that night, the people who wanted him dead began to realize something was wrong. The interruption hadn't come from violence. It had come from someone who remembered how silence killed and decided it wouldn't tonight. Sometimes being too polite is exactly what gets people hurt. You've survived this long because you learned to trust your gut when something felt wrong, even if you couldn't explain it. If you respect a woman who listens to her instincts instead of worrying about being nice, please like and subscribe to the channel. Let's build a community of people who value wisdom over noise. Nyla let the room settle before she tested it. Not long enough to raise suspicion, just long enough for impatience to surface. She shifted her weight slightly, the kind of movement any black waitress might make after standing too long, and raised her voice just enough to be mistaken for routine. "Table 12 needs a reset," she said calmly, eyes forward, tone professional. The words floated through the restaurant like steam. Most people ignored them. That mattered. A junior server glanced up, then immediately looked away, unsure if he'd been summoned. An older waiter hesitated, fingers twitching around a tray, waiting for confirmation that never came. Neither moved toward her. But 3 men did react. Not openly, not enough to be noticed by anyone who wasn't watching for it. One of Minyi's executives paused mid-lift of his glass and set it down without drinking. Another adjusted his cufflinks, eyes flicking once, quickly to the knife resting against Minyi's chest, then away again. The third didn't look at the blade at all. He leaned back, crossing his legs, comfortable. Too comfortable. Nyla noted it all. She hadn't changed the pressure of the knife. She hadn't moved Minyi. The interruption remained frozen in place. This wasn't about provoking panic. It was about revealing confidence. Silence did the rest. A hand signaled across the room, 2 fingers subtle low by the table edge. Not to her, to someone behind the bar. A response came back just as quiet, a nod barely perceptible. No words. No witnesses. Nyla felt the pattern click into focus. This wasn't a room waiting for a mistake. It was a room waiting for permission. Anyone who believed the Korean Mafia boss would die tonight had already decided how the story would end. They didn't need to move. They didn't need to speak. They only needed to stay seated and let the plan finish itself. The silence wasn't absence. It was agreement. Nyla leaned closer to Minyi, her voice low, controlled, intimate enough to be mistaken for service. "Don't look around," she murmured. "They already know where you are." His eyes stayed fixed on the tablecloth, knuckles white, breath measured. She tested again, quieter this time. "Run her to the back," she said, as if correcting staff flow. One man stood halfway, then stopped, sat back down, smiled. There it was. The tell. Nyla's grip on the knife remained steady, but her certainty hardened. She wasn't just preventing an assassination anymore. She was mapping it. The black waitress wasn't an interruption to them. She was a variable they hadn't planned for. "They think silence protects them," she whispered to Minyi. "It doesn't." He felt it then, the shift in the room, subtle but undeniable. The people who mattered weren't nervous. They were patient. They believed the ending was inevitable. Nyla straightened slightly, just enough to change the balance of power without changing the image. Her calm wasn't defensive now. It was diagnostic. The test was over. And somewhere among the men who hadn't moved, hadn't spoken, hadn't looked afraid, was the traitor who believed stillness would save him. Nyla had already marked him. Not with a knife, but with attention. Nyla understood the second, trapped the moment she saw the phone. It wasn't raised. It wasn't pointed. It lay flat on the table 2 rows back, screen dark, angled just enough to capture the reflection of polished silverware, recording without looking like it was, waiting. She followed the invisible line of it and found the restaurant manager standing near the host stand, posture stiff, hands folded like a witness rehearsing his role. His eyes flicked between Minyi and the exits, not with concern, but with preparation. A story was already forming. Black waitress attacks Korean Mafia boss. Security intervenes. Tragedy narrowly avoided, or explained too late. The knife wasn't the only evidence being manufactured. Nyla felt the weight of it settle on her shoulders. If this went wrong, Minyi would die, and she wouldn't survive long enough to deny anything. The room didn't need proof. It needed something that looked believable. She watched one of the guards closest to Minyi. His stance was wrong now, not protective, anticipatory. His hand hovered near her wrist, not the blade, not the boss. Sir. He wasn't waiting to stop an assassination. He was waiting to restrain the assassin. Nyla kept her voice level, her breathing slow. Panic would only make the story easier to sell. "They're ready to grab me," she whispered, "not the knife." Minyi stayed still, but his jaw tightened. He understood power. He understood betrayal. What he hadn't understood, until now, was how neatly the room could erase someone who didn't belong in it. Nyla adjusted the blade's angle by a fraction, just enough to keep it visible in reflections but harmless in reality. The image mattered. She mattered. She caught the manager's eye and let him see her calm. Not defiance, not fear. Calm was dangerous. Calm complicated narratives. Across the room, one of Minyi's men shifted, uncertain. That was the moment Nyla leaned in again, voice firm, precise. "If your people move the wrong way," she said, "they won't be stopping a murder. They'll be finishing a frame." He breathed once, controlled. She felt it through the blade. The guard's fingers twitched. Nyla locked eyes with him briefly, just long enough to make him hesitate, just long enough to disrupt timing. This wasn't about force. It was about asterisk sequence asterisk asterisk. She let the silence stretch. The phone kept recording. The manager waited. The guard didn't move. "Good. They planned for me to panic," Nyla murmured. "They planned for you to die." Her grip never faltered. "And they planned for me to disappear right after." For the first time since the interruption began, the people who thought they controlled the ending realized the black waitress wasn't just holding a knife. She was holding the story. And if they rushed her now, the Korean Mafia boss would survive, but the truth wouldn't. Nyla stayed exactly where she was, balanced between survival and accusation, knowing the next move had to save 2 lives, including her own. You've seen it happen time and time again, how easily the truth gets twisted by people in power to suit their own agenda. They are trying to manufacture a lie right in front of us. Don't let them get away with it. Leave a comment saying, "I see IT below. Let's go on the record and make sure the truth stands." Your voice is the witness they are afraid of. The sound came sharp and wrong. Glass shattered against tile, too loud, too sudden, cutting through the restaurant's soft murmur like a blade drawn too fast. The table nearest the bar jolted in surprise. Someone gasped. A chair scraped. The chaos cue. Almost immediately, a voice rose from the kitchen. Not panic, not fear. A rehearsed shout, half warning, half excuse. The kind meant to justify movement. Nyla felt the room tighten. One of the guards stood too quickly, chair legs shrieking as they dragged. Another's hand dipped inside his jacket. Minyi's men tensed in response, muscle memory screaming to act, to protect, to end the threat in front of them. This was the moment. This was where the Korean Mafia boss was supposed to die. Nyla leaned in, her mouth close to Minyi's ear, her words coming fast but steady. "If they move, you die," she whispered. "If they shoot, I die. Stay still." His body locked. The knife remained exactly where it was, flat steel against his chest, unmoving, undeniable. Nyla didn't raise it. She didn't pull away. Any sudden change would tip the balance and give someone permission. The guard who'd stood hesitated, confusion flickering across his face. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Panic was supposed to lead. Guns were supposed to follow. But the black waitress hadn't panicked. Another glass fell somewhere behind them, knocked loose in the confusion. A server froze mid-step. The manager took a half step forward, then stopped, as if remembering he wasn't meant to be visible yet. Nyla watched everything at once. She saw the executive who didn't flinch. The one who stayed seated, calm, patient. The one who believed the ending was inevitable. She raised her voice, not loud, not commanding, just enough to cut through the noise without inviting it. "Careful," she said, as if speaking to staff. "You don't want this to get worse." The guard's hand paused. Minyi's men waited, caught between instinct and uncertainty. They were trained to respond to threats. They weren't trained for stillness. Nyla kept the blade steady, her breathing even. This wasn't about dominance. It was about timing. 1 second too early and she was dead. 1 second too late and so was he. "Eyes down," she whispered to Minyi. "Let them wonder." The room hovered on the edge of disaster. A gun half-cleared leather. A finger tightened. A breath caught. Then nothing. The silence returned, thicker now, charged with all the violence it had just swallowed. The guard slowly sat back down. Another withdrew his hand, face tight with frustration. The chaos cue had failed. Someone had miscalculated. Nyla felt it, the shift, subtle but seismic. The people who had planned this assassination realized the interruption wasn't breaking. It was holding. The black waitress hadn't flinched. The Korean Mafia boss hadn't moved. And in the space where panic was meant to bloom, control took root instead, quiet, unyielding, and deadly precise. The room exhaled. Nyla didn't. She knew the hardest part was still coming. Nyla didn't rush the counter. She let the room believe it had survived the worst of it. The silence settled again, heavier now, stretched thin by the violence it had just swallowed. Glass lay shattered near the bar. A server knelt to clean it, hands shaking just enough to look real. The phone 2 tables back kept recording, patient as a witness that thought it had already won. Nyla shifted her weight and spoke without looking away from Minyi. "Jin," she said softly, addressing the senior server by name, as if correcting a routine mistake. "Take the tray to the left. You're blocking sightlines." Jin hesitated, then obeyed. He moved exactly where she needed him, between the phone and Minyi's chest, his polished serving tray catching the light as he turned. From the corner of her eye, Nyla saw the camera's view fracture into reflections. Faces, silverware, distortion. Good. She angled the knife just enough to reflect the room in the tray's mirrored surface. Not the blade, the people behind it. The reflection told her everything. She saw the man who hadn't panicked, the one who'd stayed seated through the chaos cue. His hand lifted slightly, 2 fingers brushing the tablecloth, low, subtle, meant only for someone trained to see it. A second signal. Clearer than the first. Nyla let him complete it. That was the trap. She raised her voice just enough to carry. "Careful," she said calmly, eyes still forward. "You don't want witnesses confused about who moved first." The traitor's hand froze mid-gesture. Too late. The mirrored tray caught it cleanly. The phone caught it cleaner. Minyi felt the shift before he saw it. The tension in the room changed, not fear now, but recognition. The script had been rewritten. Nyla leaned in close, her whisper controlled and precise. "He thinks silence still protects him," she murmured. "It doesn't." She held the knife steady, never breaking the image of threat, even as she dismantled it piece by piece. The control blade remained flat against the Korean Mafia boss's chest, the interruption still intact. Anyone watching would see danger. Only Minyi felt the truth. The silent signal had flipped. The men who'd stayed seated now looked exposed. The ones who'd waited looked suddenly unsure. The manager's posture stiffened, his certainty leaking away as he realized the story he'd prepared no longer fit the evidence being recorded. Nyla didn't smile. She didn't need to. Now, she whispered to Minyi, when they move, they won't be stopping an attack. His breath was steady, his stillness absolute. They'll be explaining one. Across the room, the traitor finally understood what had gone wrong. He'd planned for panic. He'd planned for noise. He hadn't planned for a black waitress to turn his silence into testimony. The room stayed quiet. But it no longer belonged to him. The realization didn't land all at once. It rippled. The mirrored tray still reflected the room in fragments. Hands, faces, movements caught where they didn't belong. The phone on the table continued recording, no longer documenting a crime in progress, but the shape of a betrayal unfolding in real time. The head of security shifted. Not much, not enough to draw attention from anyone who didn't know him well, but Minyi knew the rhythm of his men the way a composer knew silence between notes. This pause was wrong. Too late, too careful. The man had always moved first. Now he waited. Nyla felt Minyi's breath change, not faster, not panicked, focused. He had seen it too. The pattern she'd laid bare had reached him. She didn't tighten the blade. She didn't release it. The control blade remained exactly where it had been since the interruption began, flat steel resting against the Korean Mafia boss's chest, holding the image of danger together while the truth separated quietly. Minyi spoke at last. Just one sentence. Soft enough that it didn't compete with the room, calm enough that no one mistook it for emotion. "Stand down," he said, "not her." The effect was immediate. His men moved, not rushed, not frantic, but precise, practiced, lethal in their calm. 2 guards blocked exits. Another stepped behind the head of security before the man realized the permission had shifted. The traitor turned too slowly. His mouth opened, searching for a narrative that no longer fit. Self-defense, confusion, a misunderstanding, but the phone had captured the signal. The mirrored tray had caught his hand. Timing had betrayed him more cleanly than any knife ever could. "This isn't necessary," he began. Minyi didn't look at him. Nyla felt the truth of it settle into the man's posture, the way his shoulders dropped, the way certainty drained from his eyes. He understood then what he'd miscalculated. The black waitress hadn't interrupted the assassination. She had rewritten it. The room stayed silent, but it was no longer complicit. The people who had waited for death now watched power reclaim itself without spectacle. Minyi spoke again, quieter still. "Remove him." No anger, no satisfaction, just finality. The head of security was escorted away, his protests swallowed by the same silence he'd trusted to protect him. The restaurant resumed breathing, but it was different now, less rehearsed, more real. Nyla finally eased the blade away. She stepped back, returning the knife to her side as if concluding a task she'd been assigned all along. The image of threat dissolved, leaving behind something sharper. Understanding. Minyi turned his head just enough to look at her. For the first time that night, his voice carried something new. Not command. Respect. "You didn't save my life," he said quietly, eyes steady on hers. "You decided who deserved to keep theirs." The OH moment rippled through the room. And everyone there understood the truth at once. The most dangerous person in the restaurant had never been the Korean Mafia boss. It had been the woman who stopped his death without ever raising her voice. You know that real power doesn't need to shout. We live in a world full of noise, but tonight you saw the strength of quiet dignity. Nyla commanded the entire room without raising her voice once. If you still appreciate that kind of old-school strength, the kind that commands respect instead of demanding it, share this with someone. The restaurant never fully returned to normal. Plates were cleared, glass replaced, voices resumed, but the rhythm was off, as if everyone felt the echo of what almost happened and didn't know where to place it. Survival had passed through the room, and it had changed the air. Choi Minyi remained, seated for a moment longer than necessary. Not because he was weak, But because stillness had just saved his life, and he understood the value of letting a lesson settle, when he finally rose, the movement was deliberate, controlled. The Korean Mafia boss had survived an assassination without a single shot fired. His eyes found Nyla. No gratitude crossed his face. No relief. Men like Minyi didn't thank fate. They accounted for it. "You'll stay," he said quietly, not as a request. Two of his men repositioned instantly, not near her wrists, not near the knife, but close enough that anyone watching would understand the shift. Protection, surveillance, the same thing depending on who held the power. Nyla nodded once. She understood the new rules. She wasn't invisible anymore. She was essential, which meant she was valuable and exposed. The phone that had recorded the betrayal was taken. The manager was escorted into a back corridor, pale and shaking. No accusations were made publicly. No explanations offered. This was a world that didn't need confessions to act. Minyi leaned in slightly, his voice for her alone. "What you did tonight," he said, "doesn't end anything." "No," Nyla replied calmly. "It changes who's afraid." That was when she noticed it. Not in the room, but beyond it. A man near the entrance checked his phone and went still. Not startled, not confused, informed. He didn't look toward Minyi, he didn't look at Nyla. He looked relieved. The message hadn't been about failure. It had been about confirmation. Nyla felt the pattern click into place with a chill that had nothing to do with the knife she'd just lowered. The method, the control blade, the silence cue, the prepared narrative, was too clean to belong to one ambitious traitor. This was doctrine. She met Minyi's eyes again, subtle enough that no one else noticed. "The man you removed," she said softly, "wasn't the author." Minyi's gaze sharpened. "He was following a rule book," she continued. "Someone taught him how to do this." The Korean Mafia boss didn't respond right away. He didn't need to. He already knew what that meant. A higher table. A longer game. A war that preferred quiet victories. Minyi straightened his jacket and turned toward the exit. His men fell in around him, precise as ever. Before he left, he spoke once more, quiet, certain. "You don't work tables anymore," he said. "You work with me." Nyla didn't smile. She watched the door close behind him, feeling the weight of what she'd just stepped into. She had stopped a death. She had rewritten a script. And now, somewhere beyond the walls of the restaurant, someone powerful enough to design silence was adjusting their plans. The Korean Mafia boss had survived. But the real danger had only just learned her name. Minyi paused just before the doors closed, the restaurant lights catching the edge of his tattoos as if reminding the room who he was. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't look back at the tables. His eyes stayed on Nyla. "You didn't save me," he murmured, calm as ever. "You just told them I'm still alive." Nyla understood the lesson immediately. Survival wasn't the end of danger, it was an announcement. In their world, staying alive meant inviting the next move. Around them, the silence returned, but it no longer felt protective. It felt watched. The black waitress who had stopped a Korean Mafia boss's death stood perfectly still, no knife in her hand now, no uniform hiding her presence. She had learned what power really looked like. Not loud, not violent, but precise enough to interrupt death itself. And somewhere far beyond the restaurant, someone powerful realized the same thing. The game hadn't ended. It had just escalated. You're not the type of person who walks away when things get difficult. You see things through to the end. Nyla has just stepped into a war, and she's going to need witnesses who have the patience to watch the whole story unfold. Don't leave her to face this alone. Subscribe and turn on the notification